أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه الله أكبر لله الحمد. Welcome to session 3 of علوم القرآن, or the sciences of the Quran. This is now officially the class. So if you're here today, inshallah, it's official, you're registered. We gave a couple of weeks for people to kind of move around and explore maybe. And so now, inshallah, we're gonna be going consistently. Now, there's an attendance sheet being passed around. If you attended any of the first 2 weeks, please make sure you check them off. If you didn't, just leave it blank or put an X. It's up to you. This way, we keep track of obviously, inshallah, attendance and who's missed what. This way, I can follow up with you, inshallah, individually, outside of the class, and make sure anything you've missed, you're caught up on. There is going to be a test, inshallah, covering the material that we've already talked about. And inshallah, that'll be over the next few weeks. So it'll be a pop quiz. So, you know, I kind of do that because I want everybody to make sure that everyone's on their toes. Perfect. So the attendance sheet is going around, and just a quick show of hands. Quick show of hands. Who's here for the first time today? 1, 2. Okay, so not too much change. So inshallah, make sure you follow up with me if it's your first time. I'll try my best to follow up with you once I get the attendance sheet. But the materials that you've missed. Again, I'll just kind of give a brief introduction to the course because this is it, inshallah, this is the class. The Ulum al-Quran, we talk about the sciences of the Quran. So that's a very comprehensive umbrella term to describe basically elements, components that have to do with the Quran, right? So it's not a specific area like you would to get, for example, with tafsir. Tafsir, for example, the explanation of the meanings of the Quran, that actually falls within Ulum al-Quran, right? So that doesn't, we're not going to be covering tafsir, but we will talk about tafsir and how it, you know, how it's developed, right? And the mutun and the texts that exists, and you know how things kind of evolved over time, inshallah. That's part of Ulum al-Quran. So Ulum al-Quran, you know, there's a lot of topics. The syllabus is in the notes from the first 2 weeks, I think, or the first week at least. If you're first time, again, here, go online within the Google Classroom. The first 2 presentations for the first 2 weeks are there. Please review them if you haven't done so already. There's also 2 texts, and this is the last time I'll refer to the texts. There's an English basically text. It's called Ulum al-Quran, Introduction to the Sciences of the Quran by Ahmed van Denver. That's a PDF, is available for free online. Some people have reached out to me to say, can I order the hard copy off of Amazon? Absolutely, right? This is yours to use as a reference, inshallah. And then the other one is the Arabic text by Dr. Nuruddin al-Itr, which is also called Ulum al-Quran. We did a survey for that. What do you know? The survey results? Do we have a? So as they pull up, inshallah, the survey results. We basically took a survey. Who wants the copy of the book so we can order it? It has to come from, I think, Turkey. So I think it's fairly quick. Doesn't take that much time, but we wanted to make sure we have the right number so that we we don't over order or under order, inshallah. And so today, inshallah, I will start kind of assigning readings from at least the English copy, because I believe nobody has the Arabic copy. Unless you have it, then I can also assign you some readings, inshallah, with that. You have the copy? Oh, okay. So I'm assuming that most people have the English because it's online already. Jazakallah khair. And then this way you guys can read up, inshallah. So I will not just stick to this text. Okay, I will go into a lot more detail, and it's important to go into detail because, I mean, this text is a nice introduction and summary, but certainly there are aspects that I think a little bit more in depth that we need to cover so that you have a better understanding. So can tell me, can somebody from who has attended already the first few weeks, why what's the benefit or what's the importance of studying ulum al-Quran? Yes. Do we have a mic? Oh, it's right there. I'll bring it to you, Abdurrahman.
To strengthen one's faith.
Yeah. So how do you strengthen your faith with ulum al-Quran?
By basically like knowing the ins and outs of the Quran. So if not only for your own faith, but if someone were to question you and say, oh, this is not correct or X, Y, Z, then you have the resources and the ability to defend the Quran.
Very good. Absolutely. And you're in a society that will do that. You're in a society and a time that people will challenge, right? And you know what? It's good to challenge because people need to understand. I mean, if you just take everything as it comes to you without questioning, and then all of a sudden you hear about something, then your belief starts to shake. But it's healthy to ask and understand, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this deen actually a deen of understanding. Right? This religion is meant for us to comprehend and think about and use our minds. And so, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, uses that language in the Quran. أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Don't they think? Don't they contemplate? أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Right? There's a lot of emphasis on understanding and learning. And so it becomes important when you're trying to defend the Quran that you have the tools and the knowledge to do so. Especially in the society, especially if you're in the years of university where there's lots of debate. And actually that's what distinguishes the Quran to people. There's a lot more to the Quran, obviously, but for people who don't believe in the message of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, that is a distinguishing factor. What you know about the Quran distinguishes it from other texts that have been unfortunately changed by humanity. So what's another reason why what's a benefit or importance of learning ulum al-Quran? Everyone's sleepy. Yes, go ahead.
To better understand the Quran.
Yes, so I mean, at the end of the day, the Quran is a message to us. This message is not, so there's maybe a misunderstanding that the message is just the physical text that's in the Mus'haf. That's not what the Quran's only about. I mean, and we're going to be covering this topic today actually, right? When the ayat were revealed and how they were revealed and what they say and what's the context. All of this is important to understanding the Quran to be able to apply it. You can't just say, okay, well this ayah, and this happens all the time, right? People take an ayah and say, oh, it's haram to do this, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding us to do this. Well, okay, understand the context. And in order for us to understand the context, we have to know about the Quran. So not just what the text is saying, but what was going on at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, how the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba used this verse or understood this verse and applied it, right? When did it come down? When was it revealed, right? Are there different recitations to this verse? That's not to say it's written differently somewhere. We'll talk about the 7 ahruf inshallah that the Quran was revealed in. Is there a different more understanding of the ayah? Because again, not everything is black and white. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this deen a flexible one to accommodate people at all times and all places till the day of judgment. So it's not rigid. There are certain ayat that there is flexibility in application, and that's what leads to differences of opinion amongst our scholars, right? That is actually part of the deen, right? Difference of opinion is a way to be flexible for different times and different places. And there's many others. Check the notes inshallah for review. Again, important to think about that. because at the end of the day, I always like to give a high-level overview of why we're here and what are we studying before we get into the details. So we can appreciate at least, okay, I know where this piece of information, why we're learning it, and how to apply it. It's very important. Please make sure you know that, and it guides you in your purpose of why you're taking this class and why you are in the program in the first place. I like to always start the it's not working. Sorry, I think it goes to sleep if you don't use it. Perfect. Jazakallah khair. Barakallah fikum. So I always like to start each class with renewing the intention. Because at the end of the day, if we're here for the wrong intention, we're wasting our time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts things that are done in His sake and for His sake purely only. Right? If we do it for any other purpose, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow that to happen if He wills, and we get that that benefit that we were seeking, but then there's no reward for it in the Day of Judgment. And I think it's very important that we renew our intention every class. If you can do it from home, that's even better, inshallah. But just to kind of help us get focused, I have a hadith here to share with you today. It's a bit of a long one. عن أبي الدرداء عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من سلك طريقا يبتغي فيه علما سلك الله به طريقا إلى الجنة. That whoever travels a path in search of knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make him traverse a path to paradise. So if you're there, if you're seeking knowledge, you're taking a path to knowledge. It's not like by coincidence you happen to sit in the place where people are learning and you're benefiting, which is still good. But if you actually go and plan it and make it part of your objective to seek knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through this hadith, will help you traverse a path to paradise. And that's beautiful. I mean, knowledge is what distinguishes the human from any other creation. Right? The first words that were revealed to the Prophet ﷺ is Iqra. And that is to gain knowledge, to attain knowledge. And that's what differentiated Sayyidina Adam from the angels. Right? وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا ثُمَّ عَرَضَهُم عَلَى الْمَلَائِكَةِ فَقَالَ أَنْبِئُونِي بِأَسْمَاءِ هَؤُلَاءِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ قَالُوا سُبْحَانَكَ لَا عِلْمَ لَنَا لَا عِلْمَ لَنَا. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He created Adam, He taught him the names of things. And then He asked the angels to say those things, and they couldn't. They said, we don't have knowledge. And this is to demonstrate that how Adam alayhi salam is, in terms of Bani Adam, humanity is superior to all other creation because of this concept of knowledge. وَإِنَّ الْمَلَائِكَةَ لَتَضَعُ أَجْنِحَتَهَا رِضًا لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ. And verily the angels lower their wings in pleasure for the seeker of knowledge. The angels even lower their wings for that seeker of knowledge. وَإِنَّ الْعَالِمَ لَيَسْتَغْفِرُ لَهُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ حَتَّى الْحِيتَانُ فِي الْمَاءِ. That the inhabitants of the heavens and the earth, even the fish in the depths of the water, seek forgiveness for the scholar, the person who's learnt. Imagine the creation of Allah seeking forgiveness for you because you are on a path to pursuing knowledge. وَفَضْلُ الْعَالِمِ عَلَى الْعَابِدِ كَفَضْلُ الْقَمَرِ عَلَى سَائِرِ الْكَوَاكِبِ. That the virtue of the scholar over the worshipper is like the superiority of the moon over the stars. We always, worship is extremely important. Obviously, it's part of, our deen, and it's a critical element to being a Muslim and worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rituals that is. But the scholar will always be superior to the worshipper. Right? And in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. The people that are most conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are who? The scholars. Because the more you learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more you learn about Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more you love Him, the more you will fear to disappoint Him, the more you will get closer to Him. And that's what knowledge does. It brings us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the scholars are the people closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِنَّ الْعُلَمَاءَ وَرَثَةُ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. And this is extremely important. العلماء ورثة الأنبياء. What does that mean? The prophets or the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. There is no prophet coming after Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salam. But who inherited the message and the knowledge from the Prophet alayhi salam? The scholars. And they are the people that will pass it down till the Day of Judgment. So there's no more prophets, but those who will pass down the message are the scholars. And that's why they are elevated in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إن الأنبياء لم يورثوا دينارا ولا درهما إنما ورثوا العلم فمن أخذ به أخذ بحظ وافر. That the prophets did not leave behind gold coins or silver coins, but rather they leave behind knowledge. Whoever takes it has taken hold of an abundant fortune. We always worry about, well, maybe your age you don't, but people worry about, what's in the will, what's in it for me in terms of, what's going to be passed down to me. How much am I going to get? And this is all material. Not important. Knowledge is, however. If you find a person of knowledge, and a person of knowledge doesn't necessarily mean they're an expert in everything, but they know something that you don't. Learn from them. Learn from them. This is considered to be you're on the path to gaining knowledge, which is a path to Jannah, inshallah. So I always start with this so we can set the tone for the class and for our intentions, inshallah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us being here for His sake and for learning for His sake as well. Any comments or reflections before we continue, inshallah? Yes. Yes, the mic. Jazakallah khair.
So you mentioned the hadith that من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما. Does that mean that علم only religious, like science, or it has to be like anything else, like probably like engineering, biology, or whatever?
This is a general term. It's not just, so at the end of the day there's علم الدنيا, as Imam Ghazali says, and there's علم الآخرة, right? When you learn about the Quran, this is actually علم الدنيا, right? Because you're learning so we can apply in dunya. That's not to diminish, to say, oh, this is dunya, this is not good. No. You're learning this such that you can apply things in your life in dunya. And so when it says ilm, wallahu a'lam wa ahkam, this is anything that ilm yuntafa'u bihi, anything that will benefit. So when you take engineering and you take biology and you take nutrition and whatever it is, if it's ilm yuntafa' bihi, that it's beneficial knowledge because it benefits society, benefits you as an individual, and contributes positively, this is part of it. And that's why if you go to university or high school, or you're taking adult education, it doesn't matter. As long as you know what you're pursuing is beneficial, strive for that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, will count it on the balance of your good deeds. Any other comments or questions? Very good questions. Jazakallah khair. All right. Last week, we covered, we finished off the introduction of the Quran in terms of what it is. We talked about the differences between Quran and Hadith. We then went in and talked about al-wahi, right, which is either translated inspiration or revelation. We talked about the different forms of wahi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used to basically communicate to humanity, not just prophets, right? We talked about different creation, different people that are not prophets, and we talked about also the means of wahi to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and other prophets as well. And that's an important topic because people always wonder, like, what does it mean that I have, wahi? Like, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَىٰ أَنْ أَرْضِعِهِ. Like, what does it mean that the mother of Musa got wahi? Like, how does that distinguish wahi from prophets? So we talked about that last week. I won't go back into it, inshallah. So if you have the notes, you can look into them. And then we also talked about the stages of revelation of the Quran. 3 main stages. Can somebody remind us of those stages really quick? Yes. Go ahead, Khalid.
I think it was, the first stage was bringing it down from Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz to, wait, are we talking about wahi for the Quran, right?
Yes.
Okay. So bringing it as a whole from Lawh al-Mahfuz to Bayt al-Hikmah, that was the first stage.
Bayt
And
al-Izza.
then the second stage was from Bayt al-Hikmah to the, no, there's a step in between.
So you already started at step 2.
Oh, I started at step
Yeah.
2? Okay.
So step 1 is it's in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. It's in the preserved tablet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, the Quran is His speech, subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's in the preserved tablet. That's where it is for step 1. Step 2 is going from Lawh al-Mahfuz to Bayt al-Izza, or the lowest heaven. And that's when we talked about Inna anzalnahu fi laylat al-qadr, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the Quran has been revealed on the night of power, the Laylat al-Qadr in Ramadan. Say, well, I thought Quran took 23 years to be revealed. No, isn't it over time? And that is correct, because that's when the third step happened, which is Sayyidina Jibreel taking it from the lowest heaven and communicating it to the Prophet ﷺ over 23 years. But in terms of coming down to the lowest heavens, it came all together in one form, in one night, at one time. And then we talked about the importance of gradual revelation, right? There's a hikmah and a wisdom why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed Quran to come down in over different times and different phases and over 23 years, right? And again, it's in the notes. I won't go into those details again, inshallah. Anybody have any questions from last week before we continue? All right. So I give a little bit more detail than what's in the slides. I try to put things in the slide as much as possible, but at the same time, I don't want to put paragraphs so that you can't read them, or the way I think is if you give the bullet points and maybe some examples, that'll spur the memory of people, but there are details that I encourage you to write down that are important. Certainly make sure you take, it's for your own benefit, inshallah. Because, obviously there's an evaluation for this course, but more importantly, you may have to pass this knowledge to other people. And I always encourage students to write things down. Okay? And you can do that, your fancy technology way, or the good old school way. All right, so let's get into today's topic, inshallah, the first and last revelation of the Quran. So I guess the formatting again is, I gotta start doing these on like Mac, but I'm anti-Mac, so.
It's not Mac, it's Google Slides.
Oh, so it's Google. Yeah, okay. I won't blame Mac. So the first revelation, we all, I think, pretty much know the first ayat that were revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, and that's in Surah Al-Alaq, Surah 96. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaqa al-insana min alaq, iqra wa rabbuka al-akram, alladhi allama bil-qalam, allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam. It's, most scholars agree that the first 5 ayat of the Quran were revealed first. Some scholars say the first 3 of the surah, but generally it's accepted that it's the first 5. And this was done, obviously, at Ghar Hira, right, the cave of Hira, where the Prophet ﷺ was doing seclusion. And we know the story, I think, of Jibreel alayhi salam coming and communicating this to Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salam. Now, after that, there's an opinion that there is a pause in the revelation that came. And this is called a fatra. And this period of time, can somebody guess how long? There's no revelation after the initial revelation. Yes? Few months. Okay. Any other guesses? Yes? Couple of days? It's, yeah, I think the shortest is, I'll tell you what the shortest is in a bit. Yes, sister? A year or 2? Okay. So yes, you have a guess? 9 months. 9 months, very, and 2 days, add 2 days. So there are estimates actually that it is from a few days to 3 years. Very wide range. What's the strongest opinion? I don't know what the strongest opinion is. I'll be honest with you. but it is a wide range that some scholars say it's as little as a few days to, to as up to 3 years. Although I think the 3 years is, wallahu alam, is I think less common amongst the scholars. And so why was there a pause? Put yourself in the Prophet's shoes. Why was there a pause? Yes. Mike, please.
Because of the first like ayah or something, we like always Prophet Muhammad, whenever Jibreel alayhi salam sent down and to tell him Quran, so the symptoms, the sweating or the whatever symptoms he's getting, like what we learned last week, so that's why he just want to take something break from the sense it's the first time for him. He went through that.
Yeah, it's a very unusual experience, right? It's a very scary experience. Like, imagine you look up and you see an angel, 600 wings, and covering the sky and shaking you and saying, read. I mean, this is this is real, right? Like, and to go through an experience like that obviously shook the Prophet ﷺ. So it took time to become more comfortable with the situation. And actually the Prophet ﷺ, because he didn't receive anything afterwards for a period of time, he started to worry that maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is upset with him or something's wrong, right? So, but it was to give the Prophet ﷺ time, and the Prophet ﷺ is human, right? He is human after Allah ﷺ. So he feels emotions like we do, right? He feels fear like we do. And, I don't think we talk about that too much, or enough at least. And I think it's important to realize this. And the Quran actually talks about the emotions of prophets, particularly Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, right? قُلْنَا لَا تَخَفْ إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْأَعْلَى, right? Don't worry, don't be afraid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, right? So I think the appreciation of that, the weight and the strength of the message and how it came, gave the Prophet ﷺ a break. Now after that, the second revelation, there's also a missing one here that I forgot to include. So there is opinion that it's Surah Al-Muzammil, there's an opinion that it's Surah Al-Muddathir, and there's an opinion that it's Surah Al-Qalam. Okay? And all those are in chapter 29, by the way, Juz 29. And this is based on the hadith of Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari. And basically, this hadith supports Surah Al-Muddathir. And I'll tell you why. Because the hadith is basically Jabir, when he was asked, what's the first surah that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Surah Al-Muddathir. Right? He said Surah Al-Muddathir. He didn't say Surah Al-Alaq. And so the questioner who asked him said, but I thought it was, Surah Al-Alaq. Iqra. Right? And so Jabir responds, he says, I'm only telling you what I heard from the Prophet ﷺ. And he basically explained what the Prophet ﷺ said, that he was on the mountain of Hira. And then when he came down the valley, he heard a voice. He looked around to the left, to the right, in front and behind. And then he finally looked at the sky and saw him, Jibreel alayhi salam, and with great fear overtaking him alayhi salatu wasalam. And then he returned to Khadija radiallahu anha and he said, cover me, cover me. And so the interpretation of this hadith was that scholars say that actually Jabir radiallahu anh came in halfway through the conversation when the Prophet ﷺ was explaining this to the Sahaba. So he didn't catch the beginning. He caught the part where the Prophet ﷺ was referring to the second time when he descended from Ghar Hira and he saw Jibreel again, and that's why the hadith, there's also a reference that he saw him again, meaning this is not the first time. And so this is evidence that is used by some scholars to say that Surah Al-Muddathir, because Jabir thought it was first, but it was actually after the first, meaning it's second. Right? That's just evidence that that the surah was the second one. But that's not to say there's no evidence for the other surah, Surah Al-Muzammil and Surah Al-Qalam. Again, I don't want to go into the tafsir and the specific surah in terms of you know, what the evidence is for their order. I just giving you that as a general knowledge to understand that there are differences of opinion, but I mean, it's around, mainly around these three surah. Yes.
So you're saying one opinion was some ayats from Surah Al-Mudaththir, another opinion was some ayats from Surah Al-Muzammil, and the last one is the completion of Surah Al-Alaq?
No, Qamar.
Oh,
Sorry, not Qamar. Qalam.
Qalam.
Noon. Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturun. Yeah. The second surah of Juz 29. So, in any case, all these surah, by the way, came in very close proximity. So, you know, is it this second, third, fourth, or this second, third, fourth? At the end of the day, they all came early Mecca. Okay. After this, the Prophet ﷺ, when he went back home and he said, "Dathiruni, dathiruni, cover me, cover me." The Ya ayyuhal muddathir and Ya ayyuhal muzammil, O you. I guess it's not. It didn't. Yeah. Sorry. O you wrapped in your clothes, or you covered up in your clothes. Muddathir and muzammil. So came to tell the Prophet ﷺ basically to you know, get up basically and either قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, get up for, you know, the night to pray, to worship Allah except for a little, or get up and preach the message. قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So the next revelation, some reports after these report that it's Surah Al-Fatiha, and some say actually Surah Al-Fatiha is the first surah to come to completion, like it was revealed in its entirety, the first surah. Again, differences of opinion on that. And then there are opinions to say followed by Surah Al-Fajr, then Al-Layl, then Al-A'la, Takwir Al-Masad. You know, which ones, before which one, I don't expect you to really necessarily know, like, oh, I need to know which one's first. What I would like you to know is these are all early Mecca. And we'll talk about why these were revealed and what they talk about, inshallah, generally speaking, in a bit. But to get an idea of, okay, Surah Al-Fajr, you know, Surah Al-Duha, these surah that came early. Again, this is not the only opinion. There are differences of opinion, but again, just think about these as early Meccan surah. And then the last revelation, there are a number of opinions concerning the last revelation, but generally speaking, the first revelation, there's obviously a very strong consensus, extremely strong, that it's Iqra, right? So know that the first verses that were revealed to the Prophet are read or learn, or the word Iqra, it's loosely translated as read, but it's also, I mean, comprehensively mean learn, grow, excel in gaining knowledge, so that obviously, you know, fulfilling your purpose. Any questions on that? Now, why is it important that we talk about first and last revelation? You'll see, inshallah, in a few slides. But again, talking about the context, you know, why these verses or ayat were revealed at this time, there's a reason. Okay? But before we go there, Google doesn't like the font I use, the larger font, so it just wants to test your eyesight today. The last revelations, differences of opinion, again, around a few of them. The majority of the scholars, and this is the strongest opinion, say that it's ayah 281 from Surah Al-Baqarah, and that includes Imam Al-Bukhari and Imam Al-Tabari, who narrated from Ibn Abbas that the last verse revealed to the Prophet ﷺ is وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And fear the day when you shall be brought back to Allah, and then shall every soul be paid what it earned, and none shall be dealt with unjustly. So obviously, it's talking about basically, you know, the day of judgment, and remember that day, and you will get what you basically worked for. And Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anh, it's his opinion that this is based on his narration, that it is the last verse because it was revealed 9 days or 9 nights after this, the Prophet ﷺ passed away. So 9 days before the Prophet ﷺ passed away, this ayah was revealed. Now, there is another narration that states that the last verse, again from Ibn Abbas, that the last verse was, or I should say ayah, I apologize, I don't like the word verse, is the ayah of interest. So ayah 278 of the same surah, Surah Al-Baqarah. So 3 ayahs earlier. And the ayah says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. O you who believe, fear Allah and give up outstanding interest or usury if you are true believers. Now, is it 281 or is it 278? There's another opinion that says it's 282. And this is reported by Tabari from Sa'id ibn Musayyib, who narrated that the final verse revealed to the Prophet ﷺ was, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا تَدَايَنْتُمْ بِدَيْنٍ إِلَى أَجَلٍ مُسَمَّى فَاكْتُبُوهُ. This is the longest ayah in the Quran. O you who believe, when you contract a loan for a fixed period, and it's a page long. I'm not going to put it here for you. So, which one is it? Well, scholars say that all 3 opinions here, there's no issues with them because it came as a cluster. Again, 278 to 282 from Surah Al-Baqarah. All came together. So which one is technically, sorry, when I say together, so chronologically, how they were revealed, the order of which maybe one is after the other, but they all kind of came within the same time frame. And if you open the Quran, they're back to back to back. So there's no really an issue here or any kind of controversy. There is some, I guess I will say, perspective that the last ayah. Well, anybody else here of any other opinion of the last ayah of the Quran that was revealed? Yes, sister? اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم. Yes. Khalil, were you going to say something else? Yeah, that one. Very good. So this ayah is in Surah Al-Ma'idah, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, actually, there we go. Ayah number 3 of Surah Al-Ma'idah. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. That today I have perfected your faith for you and completed my favor upon you and chose Islam as your way. So people use this as the last verse, a lot of them. Well, I don't know a lot of them, but it's not the strongest opinion. In fact, a lot of scholars say this is not correct. Because, when was this revealed? Year 10 of after Hijrah. So the last year of the Prophet ﷺ. No. So this was revealed, yes? Hajjat al-Wada', right? The farewell pilgrimage, which happened the last year the Prophet ﷺ lived. But it was months before he lived. So that's why scholars say, well, there was Quran afterwards. There was evidence of Quran coming afterwards. So this couldn't be the last ayah that was revealed. However, what scholars say is meant by that is that this is the last ayah that has to do with the rulings of Islam. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is no longer going to give rulings of the shara, and that's the reference, today I have perfected for you your religion. Like there's no more laws, it's perfect and it's complete. Right? And so the scholars reference and say this has to it's dealing with the rulings of Islam. So that's the it's not a strong opinion, but it is an opinion out there. But we put it in here, inshallah, so that you understand that why scholars say that it's not. And so, any you have questions? Okay. There are other ayat that are referenced as the last revelation. Again, weaker opinions, and not only that, but some scholars say they are the last ayat, but they are last ayat for specific topics. But is it the very last ayah of the Quran? It's not. So if you see a reference to another ayah, it could be because it's the last ayah referring to a specific topic. Okay, so Imam Muslim reports from Ibn Abbas that the final surah, not the ayah, but the final surah in completion to be revealed was Surah Al-Nasr, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. Ibn Abbas says that Surah Al-Nasr talks about, as a complete surah, it was the last one, but in terms of a complete ayah, it's the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. There are also, in terms of the last surah in completion, that based on a hadith narrated from Aisha radiallahu anha, that the last surah in completion to be revealed was Surah Al-Ma'idah, which is the surah that we just referenced to, that Allah revealed, Al-Yawma Akmaltu Lakum Dinakum. Yes?
So, like, Surah Nasr was like, the surahs coming like all together, whereas like Ma'idah was the last.
So it's the completion, like the last surah to be completed. So Surah Al-Nas came all together, but Surah Al-Ma'idah, for example, it was the last surah to be revealed. All other surah are revealed, so there's difference of opinion on that. But, again, it's just to understand that there are, reports that say this and this. Some reports are stronger than others. I personally can't comment on which one's stronger because that's, that probably goes back to ilm al-hadith and sanad and strength of reports and so on. Yes?
So, Surah Al-Nasr was the final, full surah, or the final,
So, yeah, I distinguish here between ayah and surah, right? So, the ayahs that I referenced are here in Surah Al-Baqarah,
yeah.
right? The last ayah, but the last surah in completion. Some scholars say it's Surah Al-Nasr, some say it's Surah Al-Ma'idah. Okay. Yes?
As far as I understood that, the ayah came as a chunks, not all together. So I mean, the only surah came together all at once, which is Surah Al-Nasr, or only the
There are surah that came all together. Surah Yusuf came all together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, as one complete story. Yeah. Surah Al-Fatiha, there are reports that all came together. Yeah, good question. Wallahu alam. All right, so we talked about the very first and very last ayah and surah that were revealed. Well, what about the relativity of the order of ayat? And this is extremely important. It's extremely important because it actually sets the basis for ahkam, or rulings in Islam, right? And how they were developed over time. So scholars often, they define the first and last revelation dealing with a particular topic usually. And knowledge of this chronology is important because it makes us appreciate the evolution of Islamic jurisprudence and law and history. It also demonstrates that the Quran has been extremely well preserved. People were, very careful with how they preserved the Quran. So the example I cite here, and we'll probably use this example later on too, inshallah, with regards to intoxicants, right? So this was arranged by the scholars in terms of order. So the first ayah to refer to intoxicants, right? Alcohol. يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. That, again, the scholars have put this in terms of reference to intoxicants or alcohol as the first ayah that talk about it. They ask you about intoxicants and gambling. Seems logical, right? They're asking you about them. What's the deal with them, right? So anytime you go read the Quran and the Quran says يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ, they ask you concerning, that's the Sahaba or maybe others, that they're asking the Prophet ﷺ a question, and the Prophet ﷺ obviously doesn't have the answer. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals it and says, they ask you about this, tell them, and then the answer comes. So in this case, they're asking you about intoxicants and gambling. Say to them, there is a great evil in both, as well as some benefit for people, but the evil outweighs the benefit. Subhanallah. You just look at this verse and you think, and just maybe diverting a little bit, but people talk about the benefits of alcohol, or how much money they've made out of gambling, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say there's no benefit. There could be a benefit, but the evil and the harm far outweighs the benefit, right? Far outweighs. Actually, there's recent research that suggests that the benefits that people were attributing to alcohol are actually don't exist. This is recent research, but even if it doesn't matter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says there is a benefit, but the harm outweighs the benefit. The next ayah that was revealed, yes? Of alcohol? Oh, I don't know the details of the study, but what I was saying is, regardless of if there is a benefit or if isn't, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say there's absolutely no benefit in it. There could be. So, this research is nice and all, it's great to use as, evidence, scientific evidence for people who always are looking for that type of evidence. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did say there is benefit, except the harm and the evil outweighs that benefit. It'll never be the same, right? So it's still obviously something that you can't do. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed other verses about intoxicants that restricted the consumption of the intoxicants, and they can only be basically consumed after Isha prayer. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. Do not approach, O you who believe, do not approach prayer while you're intoxicated until you're aware of what you say. Right? Well, does that mean I can drink after, maybe Fajr you could probably say, because there's a long period between Fajr and Dhuhr. But after Dhuhr and after Asr and after Maghrib, probably not, because the effects will carry forward into the next prayer, and I can't do that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do not approach prayer. You can see that the order here matters, right? Because at this stage, alcohol was not banned fully in Islam. Yes?
So I just want to ask about the consumption of alcohol. Do we mean by the consumption in terms of drinking only, or like other things? Because we do use them in like sanitizers, perfumes, like other things, right? So it's kind of tricky.
I will defer that question to the fiqh class.
Okay.
So ask that to Sheikh Adnan, inshallah.
Okay.
I mean, I got obviously my, the opinion that I follow, but I won't express it here because, I'll let you talk to Sheikh Adnan about that.
Thank you.
So you say, well, does this verse, we know that it's not the last one concerning this topic, right? There is also another ayah that was revealed, and that prohibited intoxicants. إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء في الخمر والميسر ويصدكم عن ذكر الله وعن الصلاة فهل أنتم منتهون. That shaitan plans to stir up hostility and hatred between you with respect to intoxicants and gambling, and to prevent you from remembering Allah and praying. Will you not then abstain? So here's the order. Will you not stop? So the scholars said this is the order in which the ayat was revealed with respect to drinking. Why does that matter? Well, you can appreciate the development of the religion or the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we'll talk more about that later inshallah. If had the order of alcohol come to say stop alcohol, cease all alcohol drinking right away, do you think the Sahaba would have followed? If that was the first thing that was revealed, don't drink. Actually, the Sahaba themselves, the narrators of hadith say, if that was the first order, we wouldn't have followed it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best of His creation. You need to win people's hearts. You need to connect them with Allah before you enforce them to do things. Because if you force somebody to do something they're not convinced of, or they're, why am I doing this? Like, I don't understand. It will maybe fly for a day or two or a week or a year, but eventually you start to question, it's like, this doesn't make sense. I don't really care. Versus, you connect them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you gradually take them through the process of, how about we don't do it when we come into prayer. So at least we know what we're saying, because when we pray we're connecting to Allah. At least we give Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that respect, that obviously the worship that He's deserving of us. And let's not, let's at least know what we're saying. Take people gradually. Eventually, they'll come to a point where they'll leave the haram on their own, and they'll leave it and they'll never turn back. Right? إِنَّكَ لَن تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You will not guide whom you want, who you love. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. Allah guides whom He wills, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, through this example, a methodology to bring people to Islam. And I mentioned this before, right? The first thing we say to people that were calling to Islam, or even converts, on the first day, you can't eat you can't eat pork, right? Like, you're a Muslim now, right? Okay, like, easy, like, connect them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they already acknowledge that, that's fine, that's great. But that's not the first thing we should be, encouraging. And it also shows you the importance of how fiqh and jurisprudence is developed and is used by the scholars to come up with consensus and with rulings, right? And there are many other benefits, and we'll talk about them inshallah, but the order is important, right? So we'll talk inshallah. Yes?
What was we know the time between the revelation of each verses? Like, I'm assuming they weren't back to back.
With these specific ones?
Like,
What I'll say is, I like these ones specifically, I don't know timing-wise, but this was the last one where the Sahaba were, basically, it was Muharram, it was in Medina, and the description was, I think it was an early Medina time, and that they all basically, the order came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and none of them hesitated. They all basically took their bottles, and they basically threw them out on the street. That Medina was described that it was a flowing river of alcohol. That's it. People just, sami'na wa ata'na. We listen and we obey. There was no hesitation because they were ready for it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prepared them for it. Through years of the Prophet ﷺ, obviously performing, educating them and connecting them with Allah through tarbiyah. Does that answer your question? Sorry, I don't have exact dates and times like that. Okay. All right. And so, yes.
So I just have a question for in the previous slide. So the first verse says that نفعهما إنما يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر يقول فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع. Sorry, I can't read it from here. So does that, could some people misunderstand the meaning of on the first ayah? So until nowadays, would people say, drinking a little bit of alcohol, I know it's haram, I know, but some people would say, since the نفعهما أقل من the إثم, so why wouldn't drinking a little bit of alcohol would be just نفع? It's gonna be.
Yeah, so people, so let me just take a step back. Humans are amazing creation at justifying things, to the point we've justified that now there is more than two genders. Not even animals do that, subhanAllah. So when it comes to humans, subhanAllah, it's just finding a way out of things is one of our fortes as a creation. So I'll start with that comment. But what I'll say to address your question or comment is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ. Right? Do you believe in part of the book and you reject part of it? Right? And you can't do that. Quran, you take it as a whole. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا ادْخُلُوا فِي السِّلْمِ كَافَّةً. Enter, or you believe, enter Islam wholeheartedly. You're either all in or all out. There's no one foot through the door, and if you're not sure, but you're sure that Allah exists and there's a message, I encourage you to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do the shahada, and then think about the other things, just because this way at least you've declared you've witnessed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only God. But in terms of ahkam, to say there's a little bit of it, so I can technically consume maybe 5%, 10%. There are clear verses that it's haram. You got to take it all. But again, this is the beauty of this, is to show how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, one of many benefits, brought people from darkness to light. It's not, okay, everybody, you believe in Allah, now everybody do this, and stop doing this, and that. And by the way, that's the approach we need to understand for da'wah, calling people to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was merciful with us, and how the Quran was revealed, we should be merciful upon humans as well. Does that answer the question? Okay. Who wants a break for 5 minutes? Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break, inshallah, or 7 minutes. Let's come back at 9:05, inshallah. And we do try to wrap it up by 9:45 so that the Quran class can set up, inshallah. So, why, so this is kind of the first and last revelations. Obviously, the first one was, where was it revealed? Mecca. And the last revelation? In Medina. So that's kind of our segue to talk about the context of the revelation. And you say, well, why do I need to know? Why do I need to know about whether ayat are revealed in Mecca or Medina? Well, it's extremely important to know the context. We know that based on the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, that the believers, the Muslims, started off weak and powerless in Mecca, right? There were a few. And within, a few decades, Islam and the Muslims managed to unite all of the tribes in Arabia and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even went beyond that. And we know that the turning point in the history of Islam, basically that is extremely important for Islam to survive, was al-Hijrah, right? The migration of the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Medina, right? I don't want to talk too much about the seerah, because it's not obviously a seerah course. So we won't talk about the hijrah in any detail. But it was an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the Prophet ﷺ to command the believers at the time where they were being persecuted and the religion of Islam couldn't be practiced without consequences. And certainly there are already groups of believers that had migrated before that to Abyssinia, again to preserve to preserve their lives and sanctity and so on. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the Prophet ﷺ to tell people to migrate to Medina from Mecca, including himself alayhi salatu. And so the Quran, when it was revealed, it catered to the needs of the Muslims in both times, before the hijrah and after. And the context of the two periods is extremely important. And actually, you will, if you start gaining an understanding of the words of the Quran and the style, you will notice just by looking or reading, oh, this surah looks like it's a Meccan surah or a Madani surah. Because of the style, because of the language, the syntax used in these two periods is different. And we'll talk about that inshallah. How are they different? The Prophet ﷺ didn't specifically remark whether an ayah was Mecca and Madani. He didn't have to, right? He doesn't say, okay guys, remember this, it was revealed when we're in Mecca, right? Prophet didn't say that explicitly. I mean, it was revealed, and the Sahaba, however, were very careful in preserving that knowledge and remembering, okay, the Prophet taught us this ayah, this surah, this cluster of ayat at this time, right? Extremely cautious and to preserve that knowledge over time. And just to gain an appreciation of the differences, and I call it M&M. Sorry, I don't want to keep writing out Mecca and Medina. Maybe it'll make it easy for you to remember. I don't know. To understand the differences, to differentiate between the two periods, we have to understand the context. And so, in Mecca, the Muslims were very few, and they had no governance, no government, no state. Whereas in Medina, the majority of people were Muslim, and they had already established an Islamic state. Well, that's the Muslims. What about the non-Muslims? The non-Muslims in Mecca were Quraysh, right? A specific group. In Medina, right, and Quraysh, obviously, they associated with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They're mushrikeen or kafirin. So they did believe in divine, obviously, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they also associated with him, and they worshipped Allah through idols. Right? In Medina, the people who were with the Muslims were mainly people of the book, and mainly Jewish tribes. Bani Qurayza, Bani Qaynuqa, and so on. We learn about them in the seerah of the Prophet. So you see a difference, right? And so the ayat that are going to be revealed at each time are going to cater to the context. That's why it's extremely important that we don't look at the Quran as just, like, okay, it's the same throughout. It's not. It really isn't. And we'll get an appreciation for that very shortly, inshallah. So in terms of definition of Mekki and Madani, there are three definitions. What classifies an ayah as Meccan or Mekki and Madani. You might say, well, hold on. Yes, there are three. The strongest by far is the first one. And that's based on time. And when you talk about time, the division factor is the hijrah. Okay? And the hijrah of Prophet ﷺ happened what year? The 13th after prophethood, right? The 13th year. The ﷺ, according to the majority reports, got the message when he was 40, right? And he passed away ﷺ when he was 63. So the first 13 years were in Mecca, the next 10 years are in Medina. Between them is the hijrah. And this first definition talks about time as the dividing factor. And this is the strongest of the three definitions. This definition ignores the actual place where the ayat were revealed. What do I mean by that? The farewell pilgrimage. Right? The farewell pilgrimage. The conquest of Mecca. Right? I think I reversed the two. Sorry. I think the dates are opposite there. So I'll fix that inshallah in the notes if I remember. The farewell pilgrimage happened in Mecca, right? The Kaaba, right? The conquest of Mecca, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, right? Again, this is a lot of the seerah, happened in Mecca, but this was at the time after Hijrah. Doesn't matter. The first definition says those ayat were after Hijrah, therefore they're Madani. Okay? Is that clear? So location is not a factor, it's the time. Okay? We talked about how long the Meccan period was. It's from the first of the revelation of the Prophet ﷺ, Iqra, to Hijrah, 13 years. What was unique or special or about this phase? The Prophet ﷺ was calling people to Islam. The Prophet ﷺ always called people to Islam, but in general, he was trying to gain a core of support and believers to carry this deen. And so the main themes, like we talked about earlier, Tawheed, believing in the oneness of Allah. Not laws and rulings and alcohol, none of that. The oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believing in Him. The Day of Judgment, resurrection, accountability. That's what causes people to change behavior, right? When you know that you have to be accountable. I don't steal, inshallah we don't steal not just because we don't want to get caught, but initially if I'm a person who does that, and now you're telling me, oh, if you get caught, there's going to be consequences. Okay, maybe I should, stay away from the consequences, right? So, the accountability, the concept of accountability before the rulings came, which is the concept of the Day of Judgment and resurrection. And conducting righteous conduct, because it was generally acceptable. People knew what righteous conduct was, right? You don't kill, you don't lie, you don't steal, you don't cheat, right? Okay. Yeah, you don't lie, steal. I mean, the Arabs at the time, when they gave their word, that meant everything. Like if you said something, you did it, right? And so conduct was extremely, was extremely important at the time, and so it guided, righteous conduct was part of that phase. And the Prophet ﷺ in particular was Bashir wa Nadir, gave glad tidings and warned people. Right? That's the Meccan period. What about the Madani period? It's from Hijrah to the Prophet ﷺ's death. Again, the ayat that were revealed were different. How? They were talking about issues that addressed the growing Muslim community. Right? The uniting people together, agreeing on a way to make decisions, like shura, for example. Laws to govern, obviously, to govern people's behaviors, and so on and so forth. And whereas in Mecca, we're addressing the disbelievers, in Medina, the verses came to address Muhajirin and Ansar, hypocrites. Ayat about hypocrites are not Mecca. right? They're not Mecca. In Mecca, people, again, put things in context. The state of the Muslims was weak. Nobody pretended to be a Muslim, proclaimed, I'm Muslim, and in their hearts, they rejected Islam or they had other agenda because Islam was weak. Like, why would you want to make yourself weak, right? It doesn't make sense. But when Islam was strong in Medina, and it was the majority of people, then people started to, then the theme of hypocrisy was discussed in the Quran. Because now people wanted to seem like we're the majority or the group, but internally they're not. And then obviously Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, because that's what, particularly the Jews, because that's, who was in Medina at the time. And so different people addressed in the Quran, depending on the period. So this is the first definition, with respect to time. Can somebody guess what the second definition is? Yes. Place. Very good. Based on the place of revelation. So if the ayah was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, it's Mekki. And if it's revealed in Medina, it's Madani, based on physical location. Again, that's a different opinion, right? So the farewell pilgrimage would be considered Mekki, even though it happened at the time of Medina, after Hijrah, but it was physically in Mecca, and so that would be classified as a Meccan ayah. The flaw with this definition, however, is that there are ayat that were revealed outside of Mecca and Medina. For example, Tabuk. Right? And there are ayat that were revealed during Hijrah, actually. So this definition does not support that. But again, I'm giving you the different definitions to gain appreciation of how, the knowledge out there and what the scholars are saying. But certainly the time is by far the strongest opinion. And I would use that as basically to differentiate between the two. The third definition has to do with who are the ayat addressing. If it's the ayat are for Quraysh and the disbelievers or polytheists, then it's Mekki, because that's the majority of people who weren't Muslim were of that nature. If people are, it's addressing believers or like Muslims, hypocrites, Ahl al-Kitab, it's Madani. And obviously there's another flaw with this definition. The Quran sometimes addresses a specific group of people and at other times generally all creation, and it would still be at a time when it was in Medina. So that's the third and much obviously less accepted division or definition. Any questions before we move on? Okay. So why are we learning the timing? Again, I alluded to a lot of these. It's again, the revelation of Quran is tied to time, circumstance, and context. This will help us understand the history and progression of the Muslim community. So it's very important to see how Islam was supported and guided and developed over time. The second point, and obviously we alluded to this one as well, is that Quran came to gradually to develop practices and attitudes. And so the Prophet ﷺ, in terms of like his perspective and attitude, in Mecca, he was instructed to do what? With the harm that was happening. The Prophet ﷺ was harmed in Mecca, yes? The believers were harmed? What was the command? Yes. It's not don't fight back. Explicitly, it didn't say don't fight them. It said fasbir, right? Be patient, persevere. That's the attitude that the Meccan verses came with. Be patient. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's happening. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for you, right? That's the attitude. So gaining an appreciation of how the Prophet ﷺ was addressed and what was taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how to behave and practice is different in Mecca than Medina. In Medina, what was the order? If they attack you, fight back. Defend yourself, right? You're now in a position that you could do that. And not only that, but beware of what the hypocrites are plotting, right? Don't just be patient. Now you need to know what's going on, and you need to basically stand up for with power against people that are opposing you if they attack you. We also see how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with different groups of non-Muslims, right? So again, how he addressed ﷺ, the disbelievers versus the Jews and the Christians is different. The arguments are different. Right? And then obviously we talked about the development of Islamic law a lot. So again, the commandment to fight. The ayat in Surah Al-Hajj, to fight, right? That came in Medina. And I think this is very important. All of this great detailed preservation of the details of the context of where the ayat were revealed was preserved by the Sahaba. So if that was preserved, can't we marvel about how, the fact that how to apply the Quran is preserved. Like, Quran in its entirety was preserved. It's not just the words. We say, Quran hasn't changed. What's protected is the text, the words. Not only that, the meanings, the context, the appreciation of how things happened, all of that was preserved. And this is why, we're covering today. How do we know if something is Meccan or Madani? Based on what the Sahaba did, right? Based on reports from the Sahaba, and they gave us that knowledge because they took care of it, and they were the only eyewitnesses at the end of the day, right? They were there, and they took extreme care to preserve that knowledge in terms of when the ayah was revealed, what time. This is very exciting. The Sahaba, put yourself in their shoes. It's exciting. Quran is revealed. You're like, oh, this happened here and at this time, and they were cautious of that. They were always looking forward to revelation, right? And actually, in the Quran, it refers to that. And there are also, another method to determine how we know is based on the scholars, of obviously since the companions till modern day, their ijtihad, based on other factors that they've studied, and they've come to rulings based on the meaning and the style of an ayah, and so on. So these methods are not equivalent. Obviously, the reports from the Sahaba go much longer, in terms of strength, but certainly that's also another way. All right, this is the fun part. Attributes of M&M. So each ayah, or depending on where it was or when it was revealed, has unique attributes. And we talked about already the state of the Muslims before Hijrah, right? Islam was relatively new, beliefs had to be established, they were oppressed and needed continual support. In Medina, they had their own state, they were strong, and they needed divine guidance to help them in their daily and social lives. Okay? And interreligious conduct and laws and so on was, the theme of what was covered. Specifically, again, this is more detail than what I just talked about. I'm not going to go into this again. But again, call to worship to Allah, the belief system was established, morality of good and good conduct, and the stories of previous generations. Why do you think the stories of previous generations was important in Mecca? Yes? What's that? Hope? Okay, good. Hope for who? Yes? As a warner, okay, yes.
Lessons can be learned from the past stories.
Right, lessons, absolutely, right? Yes? Reassurance, to say that prophets went through what you went through, and so be patient. فَاصْبِرْ كَمَا صَبَرَ أُولُو الْعَزْمِ مِنَ الرُّسُلِ. Like, be patient, like the strongest of prophets were patient. Reassurance. Yes, I saw another hand. So when it talks about previous nations, previous prophets, it's most likely going to be what type of ayah? Mekki, right? This is what happened to people. And by the way, their people rejected, and this is what happened to their people, right? Again, strengthening the Prophet's resolve, and obviously the companions. The common themes in Medina: perfect your ritual worship. So the details in charity and prayer and fasting and pilgrimage. By the way, fasting was prescribed in Medina, right? Not in Mecca. Fasting in Ramadan was in Medina, right? That's the second half of prophethood, right? Establishing a system of governance, of laws, to protect and thrive on the individual, the family level, and the societal level, and how these relationships need to be managed. The dialogue with other religions, right? So when we talk about, Christians and Jews, talked about the true teachings of Sayyidina Musa and Isa, right? So just because it talked about Sayyidina Musa doesn't mean, all of a sudden it's Mekki. No, because if the message is to highlight things for the Jews at the time, then that was in Medina, right? The history of Bani Israel, Medina. And then the plotting of the hypocrites, we talked about that as well. And that's important, not only to warn the believers that amongst you there are people who pretend to be like you, but also, and I love this, the companions looked at these ayat and thought, are these ayat that talk about hypocrites, are they applicable to me? Do I carry these characteristics? Like even Umar radiallahu anh, till his deathbed, he was concerned that he was a hypocrite. SubhanAllah. And the Prophet ﷺ gave that secret to one of the Sahaba, and he went to him and he said to him, can you tell me if I'm one of those people? They took ayat of the Quran, they internalized them differently than we do. Unfortunately, when we read ayat about hypocrites or disbelievers, we say, those people. We don't say, well, what if I'm one of those people? What if I exhibit some of these behaviors? Right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us, inshallah. All right, so this is the context. And now the specific characteristics. This is, I think, what's really fun. Ayat that have nay or kalla, right? Every surah that has kalla, this is an oath, only occurs in about half of the Quran, in about 15 surahs. That points to this ayah being Mekki. Okay? Now, maybe I'll mention this later as well. There are surahs that were revealed in their entirety in Mecca or entirety in Medina. Some scholars say there are surah that predominantly are in Mecca, but maybe a few ayat in Medina within the surah, because they came at different times, and vice versa. So I'm not going to go into those details, but I will say is the surah that has basically, I would say, half Meccan, half Madani, right, is Surah Al-Hajj. Know that surah is a mix of both. And you can actually see evidence of that based on the ayat. When you read them, you say, this commandment seems like it's Mecca or Madani. But the style here is Mekki, right? How does Surah Al-Hajj start, by the way? Yes? Yeah, people, have fear of your Lord. The shaking of the hour, it's referencing the Day of Judgment, is severe. Day of Judgment, right? You think, okay, Mecca, right? Right? Mecca, and it describes that. But then later on, the order to fight came. Madani, right? But in general, Kalla, ayat, are Meccan. Surahs that begin with the disjointed letters, al-muqatta'at. Does anyone know what I'm referencing to? Examples. Alif Lam Mim. Very good. Other examples. Alif Lam Ra. Other examples. Yes. So all surah except for two, if they start this way, they're Meccan, and the exceptions are Surah Al-Baqarah and Al Imran. Okay. Surahs that have sajdat al-tilawa, where you prostrate. There's a line, right? The line. Those surahs are Meccan. Except Surah Al-Hajj, which is Mecca and Medina, and it has two of them actually. It's the only surah that has two sajdas. Everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say sajdat al-tilawa, the prostration? Okay. Surahs that contain stories of previous prophets, we talked about that. Surah Al-Baqarah is, again, the exception there, because it talks about previous prophets. Sayyidina Adam is one of them, obviously, Sayyidina Musa. Generally, ayat in Mecca or Meccan ayat are short, okay? They're very strong and frequent oaths. Think about why. Think about the context, right? Now we go to Madani. What's the characteristic of Madani revelations? Ayat that talk about punishments for a crime or hudud. Surah that talk about the hypocrites. The exception here is Surah Al-Ankabut, according to some scholars. We talked about surah that address Jews and Christians, surahs that talk about jihad or fighting back, and generally Madani ayat are longer than Makki. So you can start recognizing them, right? When you see masalan, for example, Noon, wal-qalami wa ma yasturun, right? Very short, succinct, right? Versus Surah Al-Baqarah, right? Where you have an ayah that covers a full page. The styles are different. So start appreciating that when you're reading Quran. And think about that next time you pick up the Mus'haf, inshallah. So I'm not going to go into every surah, but this is just for your reference. And again, and this is based on, again, the opinion of Zarkashi. There are differences of opinion on the matter, but this is just an example to give you. One opinion is that the Meccan surah or surah that were revealed obviously before Madani, again, or before Hijrah, so the time-based definition, is there about 85. Again, some scholars say 80, some people say a little bit more. In general, it's the majority of the surah, right? But those surah constitute only about a third of the Quran. So how does that make sense? Most surah, but it's only a third of the Quran. What did we say about Meccan surah? The ayats are short. That's why, right? Juz' Ammam, most of it, right? Very short. And I've given you Zarkashi's opinion on which surah are Mecki. Obviously, there's a difference of opinion in some of them, right? I don't expect you to know this list. Yes?
You mentioned it as an example of a very long ones, right? So that's supposedly to be in Medina, while it also starts with حروف مقطعة. So is it Mecca or Medina in
I
that
give
sense?
you the two exceptions for
Oh,
Huruf al-Muqatta'a.
Okay, so
Baqarah and Al-Imran.
oh, sorry, I didn't hear
Yes.
that. And what was the surah you said has two sajda?
Surah Al-Hajj.
And Hajj. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know it seems basic. I find it really interesting, and I hope you do too, because it just gives you a different perspective when you look at the Quran. According to Zarkashi as well, with respect to Madani, which are revealed after Hijrah, so the time factor, it's the other 29 surah, and it constitutes about 2/3 of the Quran. And obviously 2/3, but 29 surah, it's because the ayat are really long, or longer. There are differences of opinion. I've mentioned them here in different surah. So, Fatiha, there's a difference of opinion. Al-Ra'd, Al-Rahman, Surah Al-Saf, and so on. Just to give you, again, is this a comprehensive list of all the differences of opinion? Not necessarily, but this is also an opinion about that. Okay? And what I want you to take home, message-wise, is this. Many surah could contain ayat from both periods, but that doesn't classify the surah as, well, it's both. It's usually about the predominance, right, and the theme. In some cases, differences of scholarly opinion exist. We talked about that. And most importantly as well, on the whole, it is well established, fully employed in the science of tafsir, right, that is best derived from the internal evidence of the text of the Quran itself. So we rely on the Quran for that evidence. Okay? Any comments or questions about Madani or Makki? Yes.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, surahs can be divided into Madani and Makki,
Yes.
and the verses within them can be Makki or Madani as well.
So predominantly, if a surah is Meccan, right? Most of the verses, if not all, are Meccan. And vice versa. There are some surah, because again, the Quran was not revealed the same way we find it in the text today, right? Surah Al-Fatiha is not the first surah, and Surah Al-Nas is not the last surah, right? So the order by which the Quran was put is different than how it was revealed. Is that to say, oh, they messed up the order? No. The order came from the Prophet ﷺ, which was a revelation from Allah through Sayyidina Jibreel as well. Now, how it was pieced together, as some references refer to it as like a perfect puzzle that came, and all of the pieces came at specific times for different reasons, to give people guidance for different things and different contexts and so on and so forth. And that's what makes the Quran, by the way, a miracle. Is it all came in different pieces at different times, but all fits perfectly. There are tafsir out there that talk about the holistic, the thematic approach of the Quran, and why the Quran is in that order. Like, why was it put in this order? Like, why did the Prophet ﷺ say, put this ayah here, put this surah here, even though they weren't revealed? You know, Baqarah is the second surah and it's Madani. Why second? Some scholars, and again, I won't go too much tafsir. Again, and there are obviously, you know, some tafsir are ma'thur, and there's bil-ra'i, which is based on evidence versus based on opinion. We'll talk about those inshallah, but this one's particularly based on opinion. And so Surah Al-Baqarah captures all of the themes of the Quran, and the rest of the Quran came to elaborate on each of those themes. Right? And this is the work of Sheikh Sa'id Hawa, for example. So just giving you, there is a difference between how the Quran was revealed, the order, and how we find it in the text, and there's a wisdom for both. Okay? So I hope that kind of indirectly answers your question, maybe a long answer. I've captured a summary here for your benefit, inshallah. Meccan versus Madani, themes, references. So for example, if it references Abu Lahab lived in Mecca, so it's Mecca, right? Tabbat yada abi lahabi wa tab, right? The battle of Badr or the trench, Al-Khandaq, they're Madani, they happened during Medina, right? The length, the form of address, and disjointed letter. Summary table, again, there is some also, and I anticipated maybe this would be a question, nobody asked it, maybe because I referenced it already. Quran revealed during Hijrah, right? Did anyone think about this one while we're maybe talking about? So where does it fall within those few weeks of Hijrah? The answer is, there's not a concise, strong list of ayat that scholars all agree on what was revealed during Hijrah. Allah knows best why. For my inference is Hijrah was between the Prophet ﷺ and who? Who was Hijrah with? Abu Bakr. There are not a lot of people at that time around them, right? And Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, even though he obviously was the closest companion of the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't narrate that many hadith. Actually, relatively speaking, I think in the order of 100 something, versus like Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, which is like over 5,000. Right? So, what was during Hijrah, what wasn't? There's not a decisive list. I think I've listed an example here. Yes. So, what scholars refer to is the verse or the ayah in Surah Al-Qasas. إِنَّ الَّذِي فَرَضَ عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لَرَادُّكَ إِلَى مَعَادٍ. Most certainly the one who has ordained the Quran for you will bring you back home. And again, you can see why, right? The Prophet ﷺ is leaving his home, and he's going to Medina, and it's new. Everything is new. So this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, don't worry, He will return you back home. Yes.
Surah Al-Hajj have been revealed during the Hijrah, since it's both Makki and Madani?
No. So when we say Mecca and Madani, means there's verses that were at the time when the believers were in Mecca, and there's a time when the believers were in Medina. It's not all came during those 2 or 3 weeks of the Hijrah. We're saying that, again, there's not a lot of Quran potentially that was revealed during that time. you can imagine, also think about, why the Quran was extremely heavy for the Prophet ﷺ. And that trip, in of its own, like it's a hardship already, right? So, there may have been, again, other verses, again, there's not a consensus, but yeah, Surah Al-Hajj is specifically addressing 2 different times in 2 different places. Any other questions before we close? So, we're kind of just, gradually moving towards, and a lot of this may be, obviously basic knowledge that you've understood, but at least, inshallah, hopefully you can appreciate a little bit more of why that exists, right? I try to highlight a lot, as the text does. It's not me, but that it's important to know what was going on and why and how. All of these are important in understanding, right? It's not just the Quran and that's it, right? What's around the Quran is very important for us to appreciate the Quran even more. We're going to start from next week, inshallah, talking about the transmission of the Quran. So I think this is one of people's favorite topics. How did the Quran go from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us? Right? I mean, there's lots to that, inshallah. We'll talk about that starting from next week. If you have any questions afterwards, I can stick around, inshallah, for a bit. If you're not in the Google Classroom, please make sure you put your email. وجزاكم الله خير سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Before we stop the recording, I'm just going to give you the readings, inshallah. So I imagine most people already have the English. So the English text, please make sure before next week that you review obviously the notes, but certainly read chapter 1 and also read pages 87 to 91 of chapter 5. So that's, again, all of chapter 1 and inshallah chapter 5, pages 87 to 91. Yes, inshallah, I can post them.